All right, welcome everyone. Holding by the Noahide laws. Again, I want to welcome everyone holding by the Noahide laws, and we're going to speak about an interesting topic. I mean, I think they're all interesting, but in general, laws of inheritance, right? Laws of inheritance pretty crucial because in life, what do? In general, we acquire a lot of things. Then we acquire, many things, and probably stuff we don't even need, right? Probably plenty of stuff we don't need. But what happens when a person dies? Question is, if we have material things, a person has money, has property, etc. But a person dies, you don't take it with you, right? I think in Japan, maybe China, forget exactly where. When people die, they bury them with toy cars, credit cards, or whatever, so they use it in the next world. Good luck. We don't take it with us. The only possessions accompanying a person into the next world is what we did. Our actions, right? Our mitzvahs, doing what God wants. So all material things, not going to matter. Not going to matter. Have very little meaning. So when a loved one dies, what can happen if there's property, if there's money? So there's a battle, right? Definitely battle for all this stuff. What does it do? Creates fights. A lot of fights. Who's going to inherit? Who gets what? And the reality is, no matter how much you get more, you get less. Right? What's the bottom line over here? You're not going to take it with you either. Right? It's not going to last very long. Because I don't want to depress anyone here, but no offense, we're all going to die. But there are two things guaranteed in life: death and taxes. Not necessarily that order. All right, but everyone's going to die. And there's a Yiddish expression. What's the Yiddish expression? Shrouds have no pockets. You don't take it with you. So the Torah goes into great detail. About inheritance. And these laws are complex. There are a lot of details. So we're going to see what applies or does not apply. Do we know? So before we get into the nitty-gritty, so to speak, we're going to see Genesis chapter 15. That's what happens. It says, after these incidents, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, do not fear. Avram, I'm your shield. Your word is exceedingly great. Avram said, oh Lord God, what are you going to give me? I don't have children yet. Am I going to go childless? The steward of my household is Eliezer, right of Damascus. Behold, Abram said, behold, you have given me no offspring. One of my own household will inherit me. No one's going to inherit me. Right? Behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, this man shall not inherit you. Only one that shall come forth from within you shall be your heir. Well, very nice. He didn't have a child yet. He's already very old. God promised him he's going to have a child. Commentators explain Avram was uncertain about God's promise of material reward. Because he knows everything's vanity. Abraham had a lot anyway, but he saw so what's it all worth? What's it all worth if he's got no one to pass it on to? So what did Abraham say? Or it was Avram at this time. What did Avram say? The only person around is Eliezer, head of his household. So what does God say? Don't worry about it. He's going to have his own offspring, right? You have your own offspring. He's not going to inherit you. Right? But if you look at what Avram said, it's a little bit strange. Then he had other relatives. Right? What about Lot? Lot is one remaining relative here. Not they got along so well. But that was his, remaining relative. What about him? Why doesn't he inherit? Why doesn't Lot inherit over here? What about Avram's brothers? The Kovas Aros, Kovas Shurim, Para Bachanan, Wasserman, Shem Yikam Damoy, God should avenge his blood. He says, Avram not consider these other relatives as natural heirs. They're offspring. Right? The offspring are going to be his natural heirs. Not his nephew, not anyone else. Someone, a child father. The point doesn't have anyone right now. But that's what we considered. That's what we consider he's gonna give it over. So the Torah tells us, Exodus chapter 21, verses 2 to 6, if you purchase a Jewish servant, he's going to serve you for 6 years. Go completely free in the 7th. But the servant says, I love my master. I'm not going to go free. His master shall bring before him God. Right, he's going to bring him before God. To the doorpost. Master's going to bore his ear through with an awl. And he's going to be his master forever. Right, he's going to be a slave forever. But the Torah says, commentaries tell us, what does forever here mean? Till the Jubilee year. The end of the Jubilee year. So in Tractate Kiddushin, 17b to 18a, Talmud discusses the sale of such a bound servant to a non-Jew. Talmud says, servant's commitment becomes the property of the non-Jew. No inheritance. Right? It's not inherited over here by non-Jewish children. Talmud tells me, and he's going to calculate him he brought in from the year he sold himself. Because if he stole, he's going to have to be sold. Right? He's going to have to get rehabilitated. So he sold himself to the end of the year of the Jubilee. Price of the sale should be according to the number of years, according to the time of hired servant, shall he be with him. Right, Leviticus chapter 25, verse 50. The Gemara says, what's servant? Servitude between him and his master. Right, between the indentured servant and his master. Now, what happens? The master dies. And the agreement of servitude doesn't pass to his master's heirs. They're not the natural heir over here. But Rava, one of the great rabbis of the Talmud, he has a good point. Good question. In fact, the Torah needed to teach me a non-Jew doesn't inherit his father's servants. So what would I learn out? Non-Jew inherits his father. What would we learn out according to the Torah? A non-Jew can inherit his father. So when a non-Jew dies, his possessions are not ownerless. They go to his own children. Someone has to teach me. There's an exception. Right? There's always a but. What's the exception? An indentured servant. 2 sources over here. 1, Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 5. I'll not give you the land, not so much as for the sole of the foot to tread on, because I've given Mount Seir unto Asa for an inheritance. 2nd verse, Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 9. The Lord said unto me, be not tempted me with Moab, neither contend with them in battle, because I'm not going to give them this land as a possession, because I've given it to the children of Lot, not yours. It's going to go to Lot and his children as an inheritance. Now, what do we see? What would I understand from these 2 verses? There's inheritance from parent to child. And also, we mentioned the story with Abraham, pretty important over here. So, the $1.5 million, $2 million question is going to be, who inherits? Who inherits? What's the hierarchy of inheritance? So even though, according to the story with Abraham, children have a right to inherit from the parents, we don't have to see it later, right? The Rambam says the laws of inheritance, chapter 6, halacha 9. According to Torah, according to scriptural law, Gentile inherits his father's estates. What about everyone else? Regard to other inheritance, we allow them to follow their own customs. As the Rambam says. So, in general, a child will inherit from the father, but everyone else goes according to however it goes, according to their own customs. Says the Rambam, only children inherit their father's estates. So what would Noahides do? They go according to what we call the law of the land. For example, if a woman dies without any children, what happens to her estate? Divided according to the probate law of the land. Go according to the law of the land. Comes on the Meiri, in this Gemara in Kiddushin, even though really hold the Meiri, the validity of the Meiri is practical halachic sort is complicated. Why? Because they never really contact with any rabbis. He was in Italy, right? Far away from everyone. So I'm not saying you take what he said with a grain of salt, but he wasn't in contact with other great rabbinical authorities of his time. The Meiri says, has a totally different understanding here. He writes that a son and all other immediate family members inherit the deceased property, meaning everybody. It doesn't just the son inherits and whatever happens, whatever the custom is. No, they all inherit. Comes along, Rosh Hashanah Orbach, blessed memory. In Minchas Roman number 86, tells us based on the Kiddushin HaRitva. Ritva, one of the great commentaries, student of the Rashba, the Ramban. He's got a different, he's got a whole deep thing over here. All right, what's his deep thing? Well, let's look at the following question. Person dies, what's the status of the property? Now, if I didn't have inheritance, what would I say? Property is hefker, it's ownerless. Meaning, anyone can take it. And their actions are not considered theft. Why? Who says anything about inheritance? Right? Torah tells me no such thing. Why? When a person dies, ownership of his property goes to who? To another party, automatically. Someone else takes the property, he's a thief. Considered theft. Comes on the Meiri says, okay, when a person dies, who gets the property? Who gets the money? The immediate family. Now, the question is, how do you divide it? So that goes according to the law of the land. But the Meiri says these customs have force of biblical law, not just the law of the land. It has a source in Torah. So someone steals from a deceased possession, liable for theft on a biblical level. What if somebody, let's say the father has a lot of money, signs documents later in life. There's somebody there that is the trustee, let's say of the will, and he gets most of the money, let's say. And it only gets split equally because he said this is what my father wanted. He's a thief. Has no right to do that. Right? He's stealing over here. So that's forbidden, obviously. We could say it's ownerless. There are no laws of inheritance, not theft. Comes on the Rambam. The Rambam says son automatically inherits. And that right cannot be mitigated by custom. Nothing to do with custom. Son inherits. But what if you don't have a son? Murphy's law. Or Murphy-Stein's laws, I would say. You don't have a son. So what do? You divide it among the remaining relatives. And that would go by custom. How do we hold? Practically speaking, we go like the Rambam. Go like the Rambam. Now, question going to be, what about sons or daughters? So Minchas Chinuch over here, and others say that the son inherits his father's estate. Now, what do we understand the word son over here? Do we say the son, only the son? Or maybe the word son means also daughters. Also daughters of the father. Comes on Tosfos, one of the great commentaries on the Talmud, Baba Bas 115b. Comes on Tosfos and says, where there's a son, no one else inherits the father. Not even a daughter. Comes on Rabbi Chaim and Kovas Arts and Kovas Shurim, that in this conversation between God and Abram, what does Abram complain? What does he say? He's got no offspring. What did he mean? He didn't make any distinction between sons and daughters. All right, there's a little question over here. It doesn't say anything about sons and daughters. Therefore, says Rabbi Chaim, they both inherit. Because he didn't make any distinction. Later authorities appear to agree with this halacha. Sons and daughters both inherit their fathers. Now, question, do they get equally? When sons and daughters inherit their father, who says they get equally? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. So we know, according to the Torah, son takes precedence. Why? Because Torah tells me over here, Numbers chapter 27, verse 8, you shall speak to the children of Israel, saying, if a man dies as no son, you shall cause his inheritance to pass to his daughter. Now, what would be their question? $3.5 million question. These rules apply to Noahide. What's the answer? Seemingly no. How do I know? Because this verse was not commanded to non-Jews. Only commanded to Jews. Now Rashi, interesting, the Yevamos 62a. Rashi says no distinction between a son and a daughter for the sake of Noahide inheritance. Now you look at it that way. We see later commentaries as well say the same thing. See the same thing. And later commentaries equate sons and daughters for inheritance. Right, in general. But there are a number of possible differences, right, which not so clear. So what do we have up until this point? Person dies, the estate automatically goes to his sons, right, and his daughters, according to the Torah. Should be divided equally among sons and daughters. Person has no children, divide the estate as he wishes. Right, according to the probate law of the country. Now, that being the case, isn't there a mitzvah for inheritance? There's a mitzvah, I'll tell you. There's a mitzvah for inheritance. So if you circumnavigate the Torah's obligation, the sin, or what we call havaris Nachala, you disrupt the order of inheritance. Meaning that we have to see exactly, how that works. And does that apply to Noahides? In other words, you circumvent, let's say a person wrote up a will. And you decided to give to whoever. You didn't give to sons and daughters. Circumvent over here. You say, but the will is binding. As long as the will is binding. Right? But at the same time, you go according to what the Torah says. So therefore, what's the obvious question? So what about disinheriting? If you disinherit, you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't do it because that circumvents the law. Now, even though if a person would do this, it's a transgression. Even intentionally diminishing his estate in his lifetime, so there'll be lesser of inheritance, right? Also forbidden, shouldn't do that. So therefore, inter vivos gifts, i.e. lifetime, bequests are ideal, right? Better give it while they're alive. Now, not everyone can do that because you have to live. Right? A person may have to live off that money. But there are people that give in their lifetime. They want the kids to enjoy it while they're alive. What if they need the money now? Why should they wait? Some people have this thing in their head. I'm only going to give it when I die. So you have something, from me later. What if they need it now? So, if a person gives a lifetime bequests, that's better. And everyone would agree that if you circumvent, it's prohibited. If a person made a will or this bequest, it's valid. It's definitely valid. But, you're circumventing the law over here. I know someone who does estate planning and told me a lot of people do this. A lot of people want to give their daughters equally to, to their sons and whatever. And they circumvent the law. Problem. Definitely a problem. Question is, even if it's a problem, what if they did it legally? They did it legally when they're alive. Okay. If they did it legally, is it valid? It's valid. They circumvented the law. True. They circumvented the law. Okay. But it means it's not valid though. Yeah. Now, many families, you'll tell me, a lot of interesting dynamics. The question is, how do you divide your estate? So what if you have a lot of different factors? You can make special arrangements without shirking what the Torah says by inheritance. According to the majority of rabbinic authorities, if a person skips over somebody, let's say, we call Havaras Nachala, they don't go according to the order. Who did that apply to? The Jews. So when a person completely disinherits a Torah designated heir, right? It only applies to us, whether you're allowed to disinherit or not. What about partial distribution between Torah designated outside heirs? That's only okay when there are certain concerns. So we rely on this for centuries. Foundation of Torah observant estate planning. Should apply to Noahide. So according to this, how does it work? According to the early commentators, partial distribution is permitted as long as they leave 4 zuz, right? A certain amount of money, right? Certain currency. They leave at least 4 zuz to his Torah designated heirs. In other words, you leave your son this amount first. As long as that amount's been insured, the remainder of the estate can be divided as you choose. In other words, you got an obligation to give your son. First, you give him the minimum amount to fulfill your obligation. If you want, you can distribute as much as you want to whoever. That'll apply to Noahide. Right? Or we'll see. Now, what is 4 zuz? How much is that value today? So you translate it into modern currency, a little bit difficult. A little bit difficult over here. But, the way it's interpreted, you can come out with very different answers. Come on, Moshe Feinstein, a blessed memory. And he explains in Igros Moshe, Choshe Mishpat, laws of damages. Number 2, Halacha 50. And he says the 4 zuz is not exact. It only means to indicate a significant portion of one's estate. Doesn't mean just, 50 cents, $1, quarter, whatever. It means a significant portion of the estate. So either I do it like this. What is constituting a significant portion? It varies from place to place, estate to state. 1/5 of one's estate, do the math, 20%, should be enough to satisfy this requirement. Right, as Moshe Feinstein states, Choshe Mishpat number 2, number 49. Right, that would be enough. Now, what about money? What about a monetary amount? If we assume that 4 zuz is a firm amount, there are many ways to calculate it. Right, a lot of different ways. Not the point over here. But how much does it end up being? Probably about $1,000, $1,000 American, right? Probably cover most possibilities. Again, is where most of the financing brings down. What about real estate? How much you have to give in real estate? Person leaves one's house or residence to halachic heirs, also sufficient, right? Because it's probably also worth a lot. Most things today, prices have gone through the roof, depending where you are. Kind of crazy. Definitely crazy. But, a person leaves their house to their kid, to also fulfill that. So there's no requirement to choose a larger of what amounts, of any of these amounts. You choose what's appropriate. Right? So you give whatever the Torah designated. Here's the remaining estate is divided. Gets divided as needed. Now, give some practical examples over here. Partial inheritance. Where do you get partial distribution? A spouse. So if a person is survived by their spouse and children, Torah law is children inherit the entire estate. Because the spouse will get the value of what the kasuva is, what the marriage document is. So she's taken care of. The rest of the estate goes to the children. If a person's concerned for the welfare of his spouse, you can leave the 4 zuz equivalent to his children. In other words, give 20% to your kids, 80% to his wife. What about adopted versus biological children? What's the obligation of inheritance? Biological children. Adopted children have no automatic entitlement. They may think so. They have no entitlement according to the Torah inheritance. But as long as you leave 4 zuz to his biological children, i.e., probably 20%, you can give the rest to his adopted children. Right? But again, you got to do it according to what the Torah says. Then, what about children versus grandchildren? Person can leave his biological children one of the amounts we said before, the house, 20%, whatever it is. Leave the rest to his grandchildren, if he wants. A lot of different ways, a number of different ways, over here. So, the laws don't apply the same way between Jews and non-Jews. We do understand Noahides do inherit, right? They definitely do inherit, but the question is, when it comes to what we call Havaras Nachala, passing it over what the Torah obligation is, then the question becomes, that's forbidden. But if a person, let's say, wants to give a gift before he dies, or whatever the case is, and he makes a will, even if he does it the wrong way, the will is valid. Certainly in secular law, it's valid. You transgress, but the will is valid. Let's say he decides to leave more to his daughter than his son. All right, forbidden to do that, but he did it. Whatever reason. So, there are ways around it, as we said. But in general, you transgress over here. You do transgress. So the idea is that even if you transgress, it's still valid, right? As long as you did as long as it's valid, right? In that case, then it's okay. We're not saying you did it the best way you could have, but at the same time, we don't invalidate it. Yeah, so that is the laws, laws of inheritance. So any questions on any of that? Or anyone have any general questions? All right. Guess if there are no questions, then we'll pick this up next week. Anyone has any questions, feel free. You can shoot me an email. Otherwise, I'm going to sign out. Wish everyone a good middle of the day or almost end of the day for me. And everyone have a great rest of the week.